The Supreme Court's ruling on tariffs is deeply disappointing, and I'm ashamed of certain members of the court, absolutely ashamed. I understand the court. I understand how they're very easily swayed. I want to be a good boy. I am allowed to cut off any and all trade or business with that same country. In other words, I can destroy the trade. I can destroy the country.
He said he wanted to be a good boy, but U.S. President Donald Trump was defiant today. His outburst came after the U.S. Supreme Court ruled he did not have the power to impose tariffs under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, also known as IEEPA. Now, in this country, he had imposed them, saying it was because too much fentanyl and too many migrants were crossing over into the U.S. Today's decision is a massive blow to the president's international trade strategy. Most trade with Canada, though, was not affected by this specific set of tariffs. And that's because our trade is protected under Canada-U.S.-Mexico trade agreement. However, Trump is now looking to use another blunt tool.
Effective immediately, all national security tariffs under Section 232 and existing Section 301 tariffs, they're existing, they're there, remain in place, fully in place, and in full force and effect. Today, I will sign an order to impose a 10% global tariff under Section 122, over and above our normal tariffs already being charged.
So here is the multi-billion-dollar question of the day. Will this 10% global tariff apply to Canada? Well, we asked the White House for more information today, and the only reply that we got was that they would have paper outlining these and other details in short order. So how are teams handling Canada's trade negotiations pivoting today? Well, joining us now is Ontario's trade representative in D.C., David Peterson, and Manitoba's trade representative also in D.C., Richard Madan. Thank you both for being here. David, I want to start with you on this. How are you decoding what you heard from the president today?
Well, today's a good decision by the Supreme Court, and much as many of us here in Washington expected. And as you beautifully laid out, Mike, I mean, we were the first ones in Canada hit by these IEEPA tariffs, along with Mexico and China. And so there's sort of two classes of those types of tariffs. There's the sort of a base tariff on other countries around the world, and those have been struck down, and as you say, they'll be replaced by another trade act in Section 122. And so we still have to be cautious and wait to see the executive order to find out exactly how it will be applied and to find out what exemptions we may or may not have under that expansion. But as you also point out, which is really important, we still have faced the brunt of these other sectoral tariffs on automotive, steel, aluminum, and other areas. And that's where we've really faced the brunt of all of our tariffs for the last year. So all of this adds up to me to meaning we've got to get to the negotiation table and solve all this together in the USMCA discussions, which are due by July 1st.
Richard, how likely is that the U.S. will be open to that conversation, given what happened today to U.S. President Donald Trump? I mean, I know Canadians want to get back to the table, but do you think he does?
Yeah, you know, that's the multi-billion-dollar question, Mike. But we always knew that whatever the ruling was by the Supreme Court, SCOTUS, and by the way, that was a decisive ruling, 6-3 majority by the Conservative High Court, that the president always had other tools in his toolbox. He laid out a few today, Section 122 tariffs. He laid out a couple others, 232 tariffs, which is what's been applied on steel and aluminum and the auto sector in Ontario. There's 201, Section 301. So I've been speaking to a lot of folks this afternoon, both connected to Trump 1.0 and other people familiar with the Republican thinking on Capitol Hill. And they view that these tariffs today, the 122s, is basically a placeholder, because under this particular tariff that the president outlined today, that lasts 150 days. So while he does these 122 tariffs, this gives an opportunity for the administration to do an investigation under these other tariffs, whether it is the balance of payments or a national security threat by the White House to continue these tariffs. Now, as this applies to the USMCA or CUSMA review is an open question. There is a belief that perhaps the president will weaponize this upcoming review and threaten to walk away from USMCA or CUSMA, which would force Ottawa to come back to the bargaining table. Or does this change the dynamics for the upcoming USMCA review, which will be a bit more bespoke on various products? Bottom line, though, Mike, from Manitoba's perspective, this ruling today is viewed as a moral win, but it does it leaves more questions than answers. And of course, the priority for Manitoba is to ensure jobs are protected and the supply chains continue.
David, how concerned are you that, as Richard was saying, that this will sort of carry over into the CUSMA review, but not only that U.S. President Donald Trump may look at this as a way to sort of show the rest of the world that, okay, if I can't use these tariffs and I have this review now on this major trade deal with Canada, then I'm going to make an example out of Canada. Do you think we have to worry about that?
Well, these tariffs have been applied to well over 100 countries around the world. Indonesia just agreed to a tariff agreement at 18% yesterday. And now this has been struck down here. So there's going to be a lot of confusion amongst some of the other countries with other deals. There's going to be a lot of companies in the United States that are going to want refunds for the tariffs that they've paid under this. The Congress has recently stepped up and showed that they're putting resolutions forward saying that they should be the ones to be presiding over tariffs, not the president, and certainly not having them on Canada. So I think this is all movement in the United States in an election year. And we happen to have this USMCA discussion. And so if in this election year we're listening to companies, we've now listened to the Supreme Court, and we're also listening to the Congress, boy, it'll be an interesting State of the Union this coming week as well, as he sits in front of all those audiences. Well, you know, we'll need to work through all of that together. So let's be confident. And yes, we've taken it on the chin, but we've held up beautifully. And we're going to need to solve some problems over the next 5 months.
Richard, I wanted to pick up on that because it was about 10 or 11 days ago that the U.S. House of Representatives voted 219 to 211 against tariffs on Canada. That follows a vote from the Senate last October, 50 to 46, on the exact same thing. Are you sensing that there's growing political tide rising against this trade policy in the U.S.? Not only that it could help us, but that it could have that impact, as David was saying, possibly going into the midterms?
I mean, look, as David mentioned, we're heading into an election year, so I cannot see a 10% tariff being applied to products like coffee or bananas that were tariffed before, when the key ballot box question appears to be affordability and the cost of living. You made a reference to the Senate vote. There is an option for the Senate to codify their tariff authority. Reconciliation is a term that's being used that requires a bare minimum majority, 50 votes rather. But we already saw from that vote with Republicans voting with the Democrats against the tariffs, the president doesn't have the votes. You have Rand Paul, you have Tom Tillis, you have others that would likely vote against, Lisa Murkowski, for example. So I don't see that happening by Congress. But also at the same time, we heard the president say he doesn't really need Congress to act on his tariffs, that he's going to use his powers through executive actions. But as we head into the midterms, and as I mentioned earlier, cost of living, affordability becoming key ballot box questions, I think the White House and the administration will be very careful, and I use the word bespoke, on what products they will slap these tariffs on. Just a few months ago, you know, Manitoba was in New Orleans as part of this agriculture delegation, and we spoke to several deep red stakeholders, whether they're state lawmakers, whether they're ranchers, whether they're farmers, and they are also feeling the impact of tariffs, whether it's on soybeans, whether it's on cattle, whether it's on tariffs on farm equipment, and they are quite worried too, and they're feeling that in their pocketbooks, and they're conveying those messages to their to their federal lawmakers in the House and many in the Senate who are facing re-election. So these lawmakers have a delicate balance, whether they blindly support the president to impose these tariffs and use this executive action, or do they take a stand?
Okay, unfortunately, gentlemen, I'm all out of time, but I appreciate this great conversation on this Friday. Richard Madan, who's the trade representative for Manitoba, and David Peterson, trade representative also in D.C. for Ontario. Appreciate you both being here.
Cheers, Mike.
Thanks, Mike.